So thank you for joining us this morning. Please can I introduce to you Mr. Tony Walker. Good morning, Tony.
Morning.
And Tony is here to join us today to talk about restorative practice and repairing relationships. And Tony is a founder of Restorative Solutions, which work on reducing harm and resolving conflict. So thank you for joining us, Tony, and over to you, my friend.
No problem. Pleasure. Thank you very much, Jamie and Carla. So we've got about half an hour, and just Jamie's just mentioned there, including questions and answers. So I'll try and finish a little bit earlier. But if you want to put anything in the chat, comments, then happy to feed those in as we go through and see how that works. Yeah. So I was just saying to Jamie, I'm all of a fluster. I've been to Halifax in the rain, so not this morning, I hasten to add, over the last couple of days. So hopefully I can calm down a little bit. Jamie, might you put the slides up for me? And just as a by the by, I assume these will be available for people afterwards.
Yeah, we can send them out, not a problem.
Okay, that's super. Right, would you like to dive straight into the next slide on that basis? Okay, so the suggestion here is thinking about the use in restorative, and I'm going to use the slightly different language, restorative practice, in terms of engaging and developing relationships. I'm sure most of you are aware of the various different terminology. So restorative practice, restorative approaches, restorative justice. My own personal differentiation is that restorative justice tends to come in after something has happened, and it's about repairing harm after an offence has occurred. And if you look at the definitions for that, it talks particularly the Home Office criminal justicey one does talk about that offence has occurred. If you look at, and perhaps no, I'll leave this one for a moment, Jamie. In terms of restorative practice or restorative approaches, it's actually about developing relationships and community. So the restorative justice or restorative practice continuum, or the continuum of restorative practice, whichever way around you want to look at it. You may well have seen this previously in a kind of a linear format, literally written across a page. My own preference is for a circle. As in all things restorative, circle time, etc., etc. So we'll come back to this, and hopefully we'll make this circle, this restorative practice continuum, the theme of the little brief session that we've got today. So, Jamie, perhaps I can get the next slide, please. Thank you very much. So a little bit wordy this, but I think it's helpful to go through it and to differentiate this definition from the definition of restorative justice. This one comes from the Restorative Justice Council 2020, when they when I did it with them, revamped and rewrote their restorative practice guidance. And the definition of restorative practice was kind of developed on that basis. So this includes all activities used to engage those affected by harm and conflict to communicate effectively about the impact of the behaviour, explore relationships, and mutually agree the steps that need to be taken to acknowledge and, where possible, repair the harm that's been caused. This takes place in a number of formats, from restorative dialogue to restorative leadership techniques, direct and indirect restorative processes. So very wordy, but just to kind of break it down, the difference I would suggest, or a number of differences that you'll find with restorative practices as opposed to restorative justice. Restorative practice does not necessarily require the harmed and harmer to be present. This can be techniques which you use to engage with the harmed or the harmer in your day-to-day work and have those restorative conversations as we go through. It does, however, as you've seen on that previous slide with the continuum, progress through to repairing harm if that happens. The other significant difference I would suggest with this one is explore relationships. In terms of definitions of restorative justice, you tend not to see the word relationships appear, and frequently they may, but frequently the harmed, harmer, offender, victim, survivor absolutely do not want a relationship post whatever's happened. They may want some agreed behaviours that they may engage in between themselves should they meet. But as I say, the difference with restorative practice is about relationships. So if we can just flick forward again then on that basis, Jamie, that'll be helpful. Okay, so in terms of restorative practice, we talked about all the various techniques, dialogue, and we'll run through those. But just again, a little kind of reminder of retributive against restorative. Now, this comes from a guy particularly called Howard Zier, also various other writers, John Braithwaite. But retributive justice around crime and wrongdoing, the violations and behaviours against rules, laws, whatever it happens to be, who's to blame, and it's about assigning blame for that. You did this, so we will do this to you. And a punishment is a response to any harmful behaviour, and I'll put it in the broadest sense. Restorative is about responsibilities and personal responsibilities. So crime and wrongdoing is a violation of people and relationships who've been harmed in what way. And with those violations of people and relationships come obligations that are recognised about those, and a consideration about how the harm can be repaired. So again, you can see the essence of where we're talking. Particularly, it's particularly a strong view to take in respect of repairing relationships, and as I say, we'll come on to that. So Jamie, next slide if I may. So I'm going to, as I say, build on this continuum as we go through the next few minutes. So make and develop relationships and community. What's the start point? How do I start when you're engaging with a client, service user, colleague, anyone in fact? How do I actually start this process? And if you just kind of reflect on as simple as hello. So Jamie, would you like to drop into the next slide? So again, just a few little suggestions. Use what may be helpful as we're going through. So getting started, checking in. If you are meeting an individual for the first time, even if you're actually meeting somebody for the fourth or the fifth time, what do you want to be called today? I'd like to think you'd actually establish who they are. But a check-in question, just rather than go straight into this is the business of the day. How are you feeling? What are you looking forward to doing this week? How are you feeling about the meeting we're actually going to have today? Just check in and recognizing the kind of the humanity within the situation, rather than going blasting straight into what they've got. Then, so if you'd like to ping up the next one, please, Jamie. If you've ever heard me talk before, you'll probably be bored by the phrases needs, concerns, expectations. Everybody has needs, concerns, and expectations. Everybody in most situations, you can kind of break down what they might happen to be. And I would suggest when we're initiating that relationship, it's useful to explore what needs, concerns, and expectations the individuals, service users, clients, colleagues may have. So questions about developing that relationship. How are we going to work together? What do you need from me? What do I need from you? What are your concerns about this situation? What expectations do you have about this situation? What's our professional relationship going to be? There's a kind of a consideration within that. Clearly, if we are talking about service users and clients, then it is a professional relationship. It's not a personal relationship. That's a whole different ballgame. I would suggest to you any of these techniques are usable between the personal or the professional, but I think there is a need to maintain that professional aspect in terms of what we're doing. So we're gathering up needs, concerns, and expectations, and I'll kind of reflect back to that, I hope, as we go through. And thank you, Jamie. Coming on to ground rules. So how are we going to work together? I would suggest to you that ground rules, we don't need to sit and say, what are our ground rules going to be? But actually just developing a contract about how this relationship, this professional relationship is going to operate. We'll listen to each other. We'll show each other respect. Please feel free to ask questions. I will anticipate asking questions of you. We need to have a truthful and open, honest relationship. Is there anything else that people need as far as that's concerned? And we can kind of reflect on all sorts of theories, right the way down to sort of Maslow's basic hierarchy of human needs. But all of those various different theories and processes can interact in the situation that we've got. Next slide, please, Jamie. Okay, so moving around that circle, maintaining relationships and communities. I hope this doesn't sound sexist, but my wife tells me you need to work at relationships. So they're not something that just hang around. So it's about maintaining, whether you're talking about, is it facetious to say, whether you're talking about maintaining your car, you just leave your car alone forever and ever. Sooner or later, it's going to break down. And I would suggest there's some truth in that when you're talking about relationships. So how do we actually maintain that relationship, that community? A community is as large or as small as you wish it to be. Thanks, Jamie. So going on, so a few little techniques. So modeling restorative values, behaviours and language. Restorative language and effective statements, and we'll kind of look at that just in a moment. Restorative conversations, we'll look at those in a moment as well. Circles, community relationship building, circles with small groups, circles with large groups. Another couple of people, Mark Thorsborn, very nice lady, and David Vingrad. This is adapted from their work, so credit to them from that point of view. So if we can take the next slide, Jamie, just to race through as we are. Thank you. So restorative language, what does that actually mean? How can restorative language, effective statements on the sort of relationships on a kind of a personal, interactive basis be used? So effective questions, perspective, the impact I feel, solution and way forward. So we're actually talking about, rather than blaming behaviours, we're talking about trying to get people to recognise the impact of their behaviour, be that on a personal relationship or be that in respect of offending behaviour. So if I use a simple example at the bottom of that slide, when you don't turn up for meetings, and I'm sure many of you may have had that situation, I feel frustrated, disappointed, whatever that actually may happen to be. What I need for you to do is to plan to attend and let me know if you cannot. And again, always checking in. Is there any other support that you need? I am here. So again, talking about a personal impact. Why is it that we actually change our behaviour? Usually, because of the impact, we recognise the impact of negative behaviours and positive on colleagues, friends, clients, service users. And in the same way, I'm sure if you don't turn up for meetings, you're going to get some frustration from the service user. So flicking forward, if I may, then again, Jamie. So I just mentioned circle time. It was mentioned on the previous slide. So again, about group check-ins, if you're working with a group of people, if you're working with in team meetings, solution circles, checking in, restorative conferences, family group conferences, it's helpful just to go round and going back to that very first slide about building that relationship. How are people feeling today? What's going on? Let's recognise kind of how people are feeling, what's in the room, and they may have bigger problems on their minds than we actually perceive with the work that we're going to do with them right now. And we need to recognise that, because it's clearly going to have an impact on their contribution and our ability to respond to that. So if I can get the next slide then. Pardon me, Jamie.
Seems to be a bit of a delay in the slide change. I changed it a while back.
Yeah, I was going to say sometimes that happens. The
is it the repairing harm in relationships and community? Does that come up?
We've got it. We've got it, Jamie. Thank you very, very much.
Fantastic. Sorry about that. There seems to be
no problem. So the last part, again, nothing's perfect, I don't think. I'm sure somebody is somewhere, not me. So when harm occurs in this relationship, in whatever guise that comes, we need to do something in terms of repairing that harm and considering that and responding to that in a restorative way. So kind of picking up that last, if you like, part of that continuum before we move back round, is, and if you'd like, oh, fantastic, flicked on straight away. So repairing the harm in relationships, 3 R's. What I'd say is what I've not put up there, and I should have perhaps put up there, is as well, is challenge. This is not a passive relationship. It is appropriate to challenge inappropriate, unacceptable, harmful behaviour. So what do we need? We need the 3 R's, which aren't reading, writing and arithmetic, which actually don't begin with R. And I was once told was written by an illiterate. Do apologise, I'm coughing quite well this morning. A cold tea to keep me going. So acknowledge responsibility for the incident, not necessarily the harm. Just to be clear, this is a kind of a very bland definition of responsibility. So did you do the act that we are talking about? This isn't about understanding the act that you've presented. It's not understanding at this point. It's not about understanding the impact of your behaviour. That's what comes from having a restorative conversation. So, yeah, did you just tell me to F off? Did you turn up late to such and such a meeting? They don't need to recognise, and anyone doesn't at this stage recognise the harm that's been caused. Second part of that is making reparation to the harmed person, whether that's sitting down and having a conversation, undertaking to change behaviour, or giving apologies or anything else that may be relevant, and to begin the process of reintegration back into the community. So how do we actually reintegrate them back into the group, the relationship, so we can actually move forward again? Thanks, Jamie. So here's the very bland version of the restorative question, and I would suggest try this when you get home. In fact, I had to confess to going to my first ever forest school last month. It was a revelation with my granddaughter. Granddad was welcome to come and roll down muddy hills and such like, but it was really interesting to hear the conversation that was going on with the young children. She's only 7. Sorry, she's 6. She's 7 this year. And about people making choices rather than actually being blamed and punishment, about making choices. And when there was a conflict in the group, as you can inevitably imagine, a dozen 6-year-olds running around playing, then the teachers and stood back and said, they're resolving the conflict. They're talking it out. And I'm sitting there absolutely amazed, thinking these people are doing what we're trying to teach people to do, about how you actually talk through what's happened, what you need, what you're thinking, what the impact of the behaviour's been on each other. So what happened? What were you thinking? What were you feeling? Who's been affected? What needs to happen? What do you need to do now? So do you want to kind of look on the next slide, please, Jamie, if I can, just to kind of expand the restorative conversation and seek, hopefully, the benefits to what they actually mean. So what happened? What's underpinning that? Hearing and valuing the unique perspective, because this is their view, and if you're talking your view of actually what happened, your unique perspective on what's occurred. What were you thinking? Making connections between thoughts and behaviours. It's easier to process cognitively thoughts rather than emotions. So the thinking question is inserted to build towards a feeling question, because we are trying to, in the feeling one, develop emotional literacy, making connections between feelings and thoughts and behaviours, and then connecting who's been affected, who's been harmed, connecting those behaviours with an understanding of the impact on other people, and then thinking, how do we put this right? How can we repair the harm? What needs to happen now for people to be able to move on? Because what we don't want to do is trap people in I say offenderhood. That sounds quite dramatic, but trap them in a position where there's actually no real way forward for them with their behaviours. Just as you managed to get back, Jamie, I'll kind of ask you to move on to the next slide. So then a checkout, and thinking, actually, we always need a little bit of feedback ourselves. How do you feel about what we've covered today? How do you feel about what's happened today? And if I kind of reflect back, I didn't even realise I was going to do this, Jamie, when I came on this morning, is reflecting back again to that forest school. The first thing that happened is everybody sat round the fire which was very exciting for 6-year-olds and worrying for teachers, was how, how's everybody today? How are we all feeling? The last thing that was done was actually checking out. How's everybody feel? What was the best thing that's happened today? What did you enjoy about what happened today? As a result of this, what are you going to go on and do tomorrow, later, etc., etc. So again, valuing that, and that constant checking in, constant trying to connect with thoughts and feelings within the group, and that's how we have that. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, that's what we call a relationship, and starting to try and understand other people's perspectives and other people's needs. Background to that I said earlier, needs, concerns and expectations, recognizing people's needs, trying to address those needs, allay concerns. What's concerning? Concerning is I'm outdoors, there's a fire, I might burn myself, and interestingly, there were all those sorts of things going on because there were, if I may say, continue the analogy forever, the marshmallows that were getting toasted over the fire. There were young people there, 6-year-olds, frightened of being that close to a fire. So what's the concern? How can we deal with that? So it's about, and in that case, very simplistically, sitting next to them and being next to somebody and just reassuring that everything's okay. And so, final slide then, Jamie, if I may, as far as that's concerned. I was going to say I'll tell jokes while the final one comes up, but there we go. Quite simply coming, sounds a little bit philosophical here, but going full circle to coming back to that restorative practice continuum. So we've thought about how we check in, how we develop and create a relationship, create a community if we're working with a group, working through the maintaining those relationships, and then finally, when harm occurs, and sadly that can occur as we go through these things, how do we actually think to repair that? But repairing that in a restorative way, it is about challenging behaviours. It is about that, but doing so restoratively rather than in a blaming way, but allowing people to understand their obligations and responsibilities. You've agreed or been required to attend this meeting, this appointment, whatever it is, and if you don't, then actually there's harm being caused on a relational basis, and it provides gives to places upon you obligations.